Hi, I'm Richard Rogers, and I absolutely hope that you enjoy today's spiritual message. You know, we at Unity of Phoenix Spiritual Center are committed to helping people live better lives. We're going to provide you tools over and over, spiritual tools that allow you to live your best possible life. And if you want to leave a donation to continue to allow the work that we do to support other people just like you, we say thank you. Thank you for your generosity, because this ministry is committed to making the world a better place.
How many of you have a favorite story? Nobody? 3 of us? How many of you like to be told stories? How many of you like to read stories to your kids, to your grandkids? Like I love stories. And I love storytellers. I love people who can tell a great story. I love it. You know, we, as a family, we've been members of the YMCA of the Rockies. Anybody ever been to the YMCA of the Rockies? It's just outside Estes Park, Colorado. It's right on the edge of the Rocky Mountain National Park, and it's like this 1,000-acre club, YMCA Club Med. When I say Club Med, it's not. It's YMCA Club Med, right? And it's fabulous. We can always take the kids up there. We've taken nieces and nephews up there, and it's just this fabulous experience. And one of the best things about it is every summer they bring world-class storytellers. And they have a night, usually a couple nights, where they have world-class storytellers. And the kids would be in their pajamas, and you would take those stories. And I really think that I enjoyed it more than the kids ever did, right? And they would tell stories from all over the world. And what I realized is that stories are the thing that define us, right? And that each one of us is making up stories in our own life, about our own life. And so we started 3 weeks ago talking about Rising Strong. It's Brene Brown's, one of Brene's best-selling books. And it's really about how do you get yourself back up? How do you get knocked down by life? But more importantly, how do you get yourself back up? How do you move beyond the limitations of the past, beyond being knocked down, and get back up? And so we're on week 3. Week 1, we talked about the idea that if you're living your life full out, you are going to get knocked down. And sometimes as spiritual people, we have this belief that nothing should ever go wrong. Like if we're listening to God, if we're praying, if we're doing all the things we're supposed to do, that we have this belief that it's just supposed to be smooth sailing from point A to point forever. Right? And her whole premise is something that I 100% believe. Her whole premise is that if you're living on the edge, if you're living full out, if you're living the best version of you, you're going to get knocked down. It's just a matter of time, because you can't live your best life. You can't go for it day after day after day without getting bumped occasionally. Right? And that being bumped only means what we think it means, or it doesn't really mean anything at all. And her point is, if you sit on the couch and eat bonbons every day, the chance of failure is pretty low. Because the chance of them running out of bonbons is slim to none. Right? And now with Safeway delivery, they can just bring it right to you. Like you just have to get from the couch to the front door when they ring it before they melt, right? So if that's your full experience, if you're playing life so small, so safe that you never get off the couch, your probability of failing is pretty low. But if you're living your life, if you're going for it, if you're trying to be the best version of you, if you're doing new things and expressing your soul and expressing your creativity, you're going to get bumped. You're going to get knocked down. And the reality is, it's okay. So the first one, she makes a case for failure. Yay! Right? She makes a case that we're going to get bumped. We're going to get knocked down. We're going to get disappointed. There's going to be frustration. Jesus said, in the world there's tribulation, but be of good cheer, for I've overcome it. Right? Not that it doesn't happen, but it happens. Right? Last week we talked about that when we get bumped, we're either going to learn and grow from it. We're either going to awaken to the parts of us that we're unconscious to, or we're going to get an opportunity to do it again. How many of you have got an opportunity to learn the same lesson more than once? And it was free. right? We got to go around and around and around as many times, and it's free. The universe just smiles. Isn't that adorable? He's so committed to being unconscious that he wants to do this one more time, right? And the universe is designed to wake us up. Life is designed for us to awaken to all that we are. So if we don't really awaken from an experience, don't worry. The universe can create 1,000 more times for you to have that experience. And every time, it gets a little bit more interesting. The pressure gets turned up just a little bit more. You want to learn it now? No, I want to stay unconscious. Great, then I'll just turn it up just a little bit more. And just a little bit more, until finally it's like, okay, God, I am so ready to own this and to get this. And so that's what we talked about last week. Anybody here that was conscious through the whole service that remembers that? Right? Great. So this week we're going to, this week we're going to talk about when we're in that place, when we've gone into our dark place, when we're in that area willing to wake up to what we haven't been seen before, she invites us to go into our stories. Because she says that human nature has to tell stories, right? And our stories are actually what defines us. That we are the outpicturing of the stories that we have told about ourselves, believed about ourselves, and that we cannot help but tell stories. And guess who is usually the hero or the heroine of your story? We are. Right? We just make ourselves the hero, and that many times when we tell the same story over and over and over again, have you ever noticed yourself telling a story more than once to the same person? And you know you've told the story more than once because their eyes just start glassing over. And they go, wait, let me save you like the next 20 minutes. Yes, you drop the ice cream. It's what happens at that story every time. Yes, you drop the ice. And I understand how sad you were, but you always, when you tell that story, you always drop the ice cream, right? And we think, I can't believe. I've really told that story before? Yes, like 1,000,000 times. Right? So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to look at your stories. And we're going to do it in a way that's fun and hopefully transformative. Brene Brown. And she calls this the rumble. The goal of the rumble is to get honest about the stories that we're making up about our struggles. Can I read that one more time? The goal of the rumble is to get honest about the stories that we're making up of our struggles, to revisit, challenge, and a reality check to these narratives that we dig into topics such as boundaries, shame, blame, resentment, heartbreak, generosity, forgiveness. Rumble with these topics and move from your first response to a deeper standing of your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that they give birth to the key learning about who you are, how you engage with others, and how you engage in life. The rumble is where wholeheartedness is cultivated from within. Don't you love that? So the idea here is that we're actually, when we have an experience, we're actually going to get conscious about the story that we tell ourselves in that experience. Because if you have an experience, let's just say Christmas, I can write this. Christmas, let's just say 99. Okay? So Christmas 99. Now, if you asked everybody that was with you on Christmas 1999, how many of them would have the exact same memory about that experience that you had? None of them. Nobody will remember it the way that you had the experience because you don't remember the experience or you don't remember the facts of it. You remember your experience of it. And more importantly, you remember the meaning you've attached to it. What did it mean? What did it mean about you? What did it mean about them? What did it mean? And what happens is we tend to tell the same stories over and over and over again. Have you ever heard your own victim story? Now, I know nobody in this room would ever feel like a victim, right? But have you ever heard your own victim story? And then once you begin to listen for your own victim story, you begin to hear it in multiple ways. Oh, this is how I told my victim story when I was a kid. This is how I told my victim story when I was at work. This is how I tell my victim story in my relationships. But notice, if we put all those stories side by side, the narrative that transcends all of them is, I'm a big fat net victim. Anybody willing to own that with me? That you've ever told a story that makes you the victim? Right? We got 6 of us. We're up to half dozen. Will you say this with me out loud? I have told stories that make me a victim. Let's say it out loud. I have told stories that make me a victim. I have told stories that make me a victim at least 100 times. Together? I have told stories that make me a victim at least 100 times. I have told stories that make me a victim at least 1,000 times. Together? I have told those stories that make me a victim at least 1,000 times. I have told at least 100 million victim stories in my life. Will you say that with me? I have told at least 100 million victim stories in my life. Now, were you always right that you were a victim in that story? Because it's your story. Right? You don't say, oh, the other person that I ran over, they were the victim. No, you were the victim because they got in the way of your car. And now your insurance is going to go up because they got in your way. Right? So you're always the victim when you tell your victim story. Because if you can't tell a good victim story, you didn't make it past 5. Right? How many of you remember ever running to a parent and having a great victim story about if you had siblings, or even if you didn't have siblings? How many of you remember at a very early age running to a parent saying, I'm a total victim and it's all their fault? Right? And so we've learned these victim stories at a very early age. And as we got older, we just got more and more creative and the victims were signing up right and left. So tonight, what if you took 100% ownership of your victim story? The rumble begins, and that's, again, what she calls it. The rumble begins with turning our curiosity level and becoming aware of the stories we're telling about ourselves, about our hurts, about our anger, our frustration, our pain. The minute we find ourselves face down on the arena floor, our mind goes to work trying to make sense of what happened. This story is driven by our emotions and our intimate need for self-protection, which means it's most likely not accurate, well thought out, or even civil. In fact, if your first version of the story is anything like mine, you're either an outlier if you're honest or not being honest at all. She goes on. In the absence of data, we will always make up a story, right? It's how we are wired. In fact, we need to make up stories, especially when we are hurt. It is part of our primitive survival wiring. Meaning making up is in our biology. It's our default. And we often come to the stories that make sense, that make us feel better, that make us feel connected, but we always make them up. Learning to be conscious of our story is an act of bravery. I am 100% responsible for all the stories I tell about myself and my life. Together? I am 100% responsible for all the stories that I make up about myself and my life. I am 100% responsible. How many of you believe that every time, like anybody get woken up this morning about 4 o'clock with thunder and lightning? Now, how many of you believe that that was Thor? You know the god Thor that creates thunder and lightning through his great hammer? How many of you believed when you heard thunder and lightning this morning at 4 a.m. that it was the god Thor banging his hammer against the universe, causing thunder and lightning? Nobody? One guy, thank you. Another Viking. Go Vikings, right? So the whole reality is, right, there was a time in our DNA where we actually believed that elephants were holding up the world. where Thor created thunder and lightning. Where in our mythology we believed it, and now we think we are so much more sophisticated that we don't believe that Thor creates thunder and lightning. But we believe our stories just like they were true. And the thing about it is that from the time we were children, if we didn't have all the facts, don't worry. We'll just fill in the details with making stuff up. And as adults, we do exactly the same thing. If you don't have all the facts, no problem. I'm assuring it was my fault, or I'm sure it was their fault. We'll just make up the facts so that it supports the way we see ourselves. And what would happen over and over and over again in your life if you actually were willing to be 100% responsible for all the stories that you tell? Let me read one more. Robert Burton is a neurologist and a novelist, and he said this: because we are compelled to make stories, we often are compelled to incomplete stories that run within that. I'm sorry, let me read that again. Because we are compelled to make up stories, we are often compelled to take incomplete stories and simply run with them. When I was in ministerial school, one of my classmates, when I was in seminary, and when you're in seminary, at least the one I went to, you had to give talks every week, and you were just like blah, 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 and then you were just talking all the time. And they started out, because we weren't very good, we started out with 3-minute talks, just like Toastmasters. You know, you start out with little baby talks, and you get up to longer and longer. So the first ones were 3 minutes, and then 5 minutes, and we would tell these talks. And one of my classmates gave this great talk that just bonked me in the head, man. It was so good, so right on. And apparently, I was making a very, you know when somebody really hits you with a deep spiritual truth that you don't really want to hear? How sometimes it shows up on your face as a grimace or a right? And so my classmate was giving this great talk, and apparently the expression on my face was not a happy one, right? And she understood that look on my face, that meant that her talk wasn't very good. Right? And I thought it was a fantastic talk. It was a talk that just went right into me. It was confrontational, but in the best kind of confrontational way. It was a great talk. But apparently, the expression on my face was not happy and light. Right? So she finishes the talk, and she begins to cry. Oh, I know. She begins to cry. And she looks right at me and says, I can't believe the way you acted. And I'm like, what? First, I didn't know why she was crying. And then, boom, I can't believe the way you acted. And then, boom, boom. And I'm like, whoa, what just happened here? Right? And then she ran out of the room. And I'm like, I think maybe it's my job to go check, but I don't really want to. Have you ever had one of those friends where they're having a big emotional experience and you don't really want to check on them? Come on, guys, help me out, right? They're having a big emotional experience and you don't really want to, but you know that it's kind of your job. And so I go on and say, what's wrong? And she said, I can't believe how much the way you acted in my talk. That's what she said. I can't believe the way you acted in my talk. I'm thinking, acted? Right? I think I was just sitting appropriately, right? And she said, but the expression on your face said it all. You thought it was a terrible talk, and I can't believe you thought it was a terrible talk. Terrible talk? It was a fantastic talk. I'm sorry, but this is the only look I have when a great talk hits me right between the eyes. This is what my face does. It contorts. It wasn't easy. I had to address issues in my life, and it was only 3 minutes long, but you just slammed me in 3 minutes, and I wasn't prepared. Most of our talks aren't very good, and this one was a great one. She said, you don't really believe it was a great talk. How psychic are you? I thought I believed it was a great talk, right? So I said, no, it really was a great talk. And it was such a good talk that I was really I was confronted by it. It was a great talk. And she said, really? Like it was a moment where you, like as puppy ministers, we kind of had to learn, right, that if you pay attention to everybody's facial expressions in the room that you're speaking in, you can get way confused because everybody's having, and sometimes when they get up and walk out, it's just they have to go to the bathroom. You know? But if you're not self-aware, you're into making up a story about what that means, and it may not mean that at all. And so we're looking at all the people around us, and we're making up all the stories about what their behavior means and what their behavior means about us and about our relationship and what they mean to us and what we mean to them. And we're making up all these stories that really have no basis in fact, but yet they over and over again take us to the place, to a dark place that most of us don't want to be. So when you're telling yourself a story, it's one thing if you're conscious enough to realize it's a story. It's another thing if you're told that story so often that it just supports that belief. And if that belief says that you're not enough, it really is problematic. The most dangerous stories we make up are the narratives that diminish us, that are comments about our inherent worthiness. We must reclaim the truth about our lovability, our divinity, and our creativity. And then she talks about her research in these three areas. She talks about lovability. She says, many of my research participants who have gone through painful breakups or divorce have been betrayed by a partner or an experience of distant or uncaring relationship with a parent or family member, spoke about responding to their pain with a story about being unlovable. What I want you to see tonight is how many times when we're telling a story about ourselves, we make ourselves broken or unlovable. And we believe that story that we are broken or unlovable so often, we believe it's the core of the problem. But it also creates a solution. I think, well, that's weird, Richard. Okay, so last week we talked about your success. Just say success formula. And we talked about how every successful person has a way that they've been successful, and that no matter how successful they become, they also have a core deficiency. And the core deficiency is what they believe is wrong with them. And you would think that the more successful you would come, it would heal this core deficiency. It would heal the sense that you're unlovable or broken or not good enough or whatever. But in reality, it doesn't. And in fact, this core deficiency explains everything. So every time life doesn't go the way you think it should, your core deficiency steps in and it makes perfect sense. So you don't get the prom date you want. Oh, I know why that is, because I'm not good enough, or I'm unlovable, or something's just not right about me. So whatever your core deficiency is, it explains everything. It explains why every bad thing ever happened to you. So every time you have a defeat or a failure, it actually just empowers your core deficiency of what you've learned to believe is wrong with you. And all the while, if you're created in the image and likeness of God, there's nothing wrong with you. Now, you can actually heal or change or transform, but inherently, who you are, there is nothing wrong with you. One of the research projects she came up with was, she talks about in Daring Greatly. She writes, one reason that I'm confident that shame exists in schools is simply because 85% of the men and women we interviewed on our shame research could recall a school incident from their childhood that was so shaming that it changed how they thought about themselves as learners. So that means 85% of us. I would guess it's even higher than that. If I asked for a raise of if you'd raise your hand, if you ever felt shamed when you were in school, you want to play? How many of you felt shamed for one thing or another when you were in school? Okay, maybe it is 85%. Okay, well, good for you. The 15%, you lucky dogs, right? 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 So what I want you to see over and over again is that unless we stop and look at our stories, we're stuck to just continue to create them over and over and over again, shaping and coloring and giving texture to every experience. Okay, here's one of mine. When I was a little kid, my aunt took me to see the movie Blue Hawaii. Anybody remember? Anybody old enough to remember Blue Hawaii? Elvis? Okay, so I was 5 or 6, right? So I came home from Blue Hawaii, and I loved that movie. As a little kid, I thought that was the greatest movie I'd ever seen. Elvis Presley was like the alpha dog supreme. He was everything I wanted to be. I wore my Hawaiian shirt in honor of Elvis Presley tonight because Elvis Presley was the bomb, right? He was dancing. He was the kind. He was it, man. So as a 5 or 6 year old, I remember I created this dance number. There's a part of me that doesn't even want to tell this story, right? And if you tease me about it, you and I will have to talk, right? Because this is one of those stories that I've never shared publicly. So I've never shared the story. So I created this dance number, and I had a little Hawaiian shirt. I had a little straw hat, and one part in the dance, I would throw the straw hat up, and I would catch it with my head. It was kind of like a seal, but I would catch it with my head. And I had this whole dance number, and my aunt was a teenager, and she and her 2 of her friends came over to the house, and I was so excited to share this dance routine that I'd created. I mean, it must have been adorable, right? I mean, a 5 or 6 year old doing a dance number with a straw hat that he throws up in the air, it must have been. They laughed. They giggled from beginning to end, and I was devastated. It's the first time I ever consciously remember ever shaming myself. And I shamed myself with everything I had. I thought I was so stupid for doing it. And I thought I was so stupid that I was so stupid that I didn't know it was stupid to do it. And I gave myself every awful thought I had ever had about myself. That I gave myself a double dose of every awful thing. And was it about my aunt? No. It was about my story. And until I became really aware and remembered the story, that's the only time that I could actually heal it. That I could continue to carry this story with me for another 100 million years. Or I could actually slow it down, remember the story, remember how much of a victim I felt like, and actually rewrite it. Because what I realized is that one little story, it had fingers that went into almost every area of my life. That my judgment about myself, my expectation about myself, my need to be smart enough never to get hurt or bruised or humiliated or embarrassed again, it went into every area of my life. And until I could actually look at it and rewrite it, it was affecting my life in ways that I never, ever understood. So the first week, I wanted you to know that it was okay to go through defeat. It was okay to be knocked down. It was okay to hit the canvas and hit it hard and think there's no way I'm ever going to get up. Last week, I wanted you to go into your dark places and to be willing to confront the parts of you that need to be healed and know that that's part of your journey. And today, I want you to look at your stories. I want you to look at least one story from your past. And I actually want you to write the story out, or I want you to tell it to a friend. Because if you keep thinking it, if the story just stays here, it never changes. And I either want you to write it or I want you to tell it to a friend so you get the story out of you and you can actually see it. You can actually hear it. You can actually get it out. And then I want you to actually look at the story from 2 different levels. I want you to look at first I want you to look at just what the facts were. As many of the facts as you know. And then I want you to see if you can look at some of the ways you interpreted those facts. And then I want you to look at what it meant to you. Because one of the things we talked about last week was that you have control what things mean. That everything in your life, you get to say what it means. You can either say it meant you were an idiot, or you can say it meant that you were a child of God. And then over and over again, when we can take our story, when we can get it out of us, we can actually look at it. We can decide what were the facts, what were the interpretations, and then what did it mean to me? And do I want to continue to create that meaning over and over and over again in my life? Am I willing to actually change the meaning to set myself free? Or actually, you can even live without it meaning anything at all. It was just an experience. It didn't mean anything at all. And then the last thing she talks about in this chapter. This is your second part of your homework. She says this. With my leadership team, we use the statement, the story I'm making up about this. Right? I want you to hear that. The story that I'm making up about this. Because when we're having an experience with somebody, we're already making up a story about it. True? But we don't want to be responsible for the story that we're making up about it. So we want to just project the story on them. It's their fault. And what this requires, if we're willing to say, the story I'm making up about this, is that you're now taking 100% responsibility for your interpretation of the experience. Right? So somebody giggles at you. And you just notice, whether you say it out loud to them or to yourself, is the story that I'm making up about this is that I'm not good enough. See, that's just one more evidence that I'm not good enough. Or somebody cuts you off, right? And then you go into the story that I'm making up about this is, see, it's just evidence that nobody cares about me. And over again, when we're responsible for the stories that we're creating, then now we're free. Because we notice that if we keep making the same story over and over again, and we realize that it's not giving us the life experience that we want, that we can actually change the story. But until we can actually see our own story, we can't change it, because our life is built by the stories that we tell ourselves. So you have two homework assignments. The first one is I want you to go redo a story from your past. I want you to look at it from the facts, from the interpretation, the meaning that you placed on it. And here, what I want you to do is I want you to tell one other child of God, when you're making up a story this week, that you're actually owning it. You know, and I would suggest it's somebody that you fairly trust. Right? So if you're at Target and somebody cuts you off, right, and you launch into the story I'm telling myself about this experience is that you're a jerk, right? That may not be helpful, right? Because it's still about you wanting to blame them. And what I want you to do is in our interactions with others is really own over and over and over again the story that you're telling about you. Are you willing to try? Let's pray. I invite you to open your mind, your heart, your soul to the activity of God that is right here, right now. That there is only one presence, one power. And for the time we were little kids, we began telling stories. And every time the story would go a certain way, either we would be the hero or we would be the goat. And tonight, what if you began to tell a new story about you? That's not about shame. It's not about being stupid or being wrong. It's just about you being vulnerable and truthful and honest and real. And see if you can tell stories that are more accurate than they've ever been before. So in the name and through the power of the living Christ, we give thanks. And so it is. Amen.